It's the Mackinaw Mill Creek Camping Show.
Hi, my name's Frank Rogala, and in this first episode of the Mackinaw Mill Creek Camping Show, I want to introduce you to the camp and its story, which is also the story of my family. Richard and Rose Rogala were married in Allenton, Michigan in the early 1950s. By 1963, Rose and Dick had 3 sons. My name is Frank, I was 5, Chris was 3, and Vince was about 1. Edward was to follow a few years later. Dad used his carpentry skills to build a small stove, icebox, and sink into a new Chevy Corvair Greenbrier van. At night, everything folded up and somehow there was room for all of us to sleep, which was important because we were setting off on a 10,000-mile trip to search the United States and Canada to not only find the best place for a campground, but to learn everything we could about camping. The nation was in the midst of building interstate highways from coast to coast, and as a veteran of World War II, Richard knew that after American GIs came home from abroad, they wouldn't be content to stay down on the farm. He saw the exciting future of the mobile lifestyle of camping coming, and he and Rose were determined to become a part of it. Richard and Rose had been working for years with a house-moving business that they operated together with Rose's brother Alfred. They'd purchase and move condemned houses out of the path of the new interstate freeways snaking through southeastern Michigan. They would then resituate the houses, in some cases creating whole subdivisions of these recycled homes. Mom and Dad worked hard and socked away everything they could, waiting for the day they could open their very own campground. And so it was when we set off on that summer morning in 1963, Mom, Dad, Chris, Vince, and I in the little Chevy van with 10,000 miles of open road laid out before us. Wherever we could, we stopped and looked up relatives along the way. But I'd seen Uncle Harry and Aunt June before. But the amazing water skiers at Cypress Garden, alligators, the mysterious manatees and dolphins, and we were just in Florida. It was a golden age for the nation's national parks. Dad said, in Europe, they don't even have a Grand Canyon. The geysers and steaming hot pools that smelled like rotten eggs at Yellowstone National Park. Mom wouldn't let us feed the bears like everyone else. She said you're not supposed to do that. Dad told us to stay on the boardwalks, otherwise we might fall through the thin crust of the volcanic surface and boil to death in the bubbling water. In the petrified forest, they had wood that was made out of rock. Or I mean, rock that was made out of wood, or I don't know, I'm still not clear on that one. I'm pretty sure it's the first time any of us had ever seen a desert, and I know it's the first time I'd ever seen a mountain. We stopped at a real ghost town, and in the graveyard there was graves from real cowboys, and then fake cowboys came out and pretended to shoot each other. Mom said that she was pretty sure that the Hoover Dam was a miracle of the modern world. It sure looked like one to me. A giant cowboy made out of flashing lights waved to us as we drove down the street from the Golden Nugget, and a marquee advertised that the entire Rat Pack was in residence at the Sands. Disneyland had only been open a couple years. I remember getting a haircut and being able to see the Matterhorn out the front of the barber shop. Orange groves still surrounded it. Mom and Dad contemplated building their campground near Disneyland in Anaheim, but then decided it was too far away from our family in Michigan. Walt Disney was on TV every Sunday night. How could so many dreams come true on one trip? We actually got to set foot in Disneyland. Our trip continued up the California coast. We marveled at the giant redwoods and incredible scenery along California's Highway 1. We saw the giant sequoias that had been cut out to allow cars to drive through. Our van was too big to fit, so Dad pulled over, and when no one was looking, we walked through it hand in hand. Of all the wonders of Yosemite, the one that impressed this 5-year-old the most was the nightly bonfire. Once it was blazing, a park ranger raked it over the cliff, making a glowing amber fire waterfall that lit up the night sky and mirrored Yosemite's real waterfalls. Heading up the coast through Oregon and Washington, we saw strange creatures that we watched being pulled from traps and boiled alive before we cracked open their shells and ate them. I remember Chris standing in the gentle surf and crying because the retreating wave moving past his feet had disoriented him. Mom smiled and comforted him, and I think she was happy that the distress wasn't due to yet another skinned elbow or knee. Suddenly, we were in Canada, and Mom was especially impressed with the beauty of British Columbia. I could see her imagining living there. We traveled on, visiting her cousins in Saskatchewan and Alberta. After the hills and mountains, it was a shock to see the endless fields that looked a lot like the Great Plains. I'll never forget how my second cousin showed me how to make a roaring fire out of dried cow chips. Now our trip turned southward to the Dakotas, the Black Hills, and Mount Rushmore. On a trip filled with so many wonders, what could be more natural than seeing 4 presidents' heads carved into the side of a mountain? Dad certainly was adventurous, but you have to give my mom credit for letting him actually take Vince, who was probably only about 13 months old, and I up in a tiny helicopter with no doors. Vince and I didn't even have a seatbelt. The ride, though, was so thrilling that neither one of us even cried. It was time to head home. The long trip had made us all homesick and probably helped Mom and Dad decide to build the campground somewhere near our family in Michigan. Soon after getting home, they tried to purchase land in Charlevoix, but after a contentious zoning hearing where the locals, who feared that a campground would negatively affect their property values and bring in too many of the wrong class of people, turned down a request for a zoning variance. Mom and Dad were surprised at the negative reactions. After all, to them a campground was a wonderful place. Who wouldn't want one next door? A few years later, that same land was leased by promoters who threw raucous rock concerts that continued for nearly 10 years and must have tormented those locals. However crushed Mom and Dad felt, the setback turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Soon after returning to Michigan, Richard and Rose began considering the Mackinaw area as a location for their campground. Yellowstone National Park was established in 1872. Mackinaw Island was the country's second national park, established in 1875. After the soldiers left Fort Mackinac, it was transferred to the state of Michigan in 1895, at which time Mackinaw Island became the first state park in the state of Michigan. Mackinaw Island has a mysterious ancient history as sacred grounds to Great Lakes Native American tribes. American, French, and British historical past, remarkable geological features, beautiful vistas, azure waters, in a spectacular natural setting that included the recently completed mighty Mackinaw Bridge. It compared with the majestic wonders of the Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Yosemite, and Sequoia National Parks that my family had experienced in our 10,000-mile quest across the United States and Canada in search for the perfect location for our campground. Richard spotted a for sale sign on a drive just 2 miles south of Mackinaw City. He walked the 6-acre plot and decided to buy it. Mom, Dad, and my 2 small brothers and I moved into the small cabin on the property on May 30th, 1964. Dad used his workshop downstate on 32 Mile Road in Wolcott, near Romeo, Michigan, to create playground equipment from scraps of pipe and car wheels, to build picnic tables and prefabricate shelves and benches for the camp's first modern flush toilet and shower building. Dad had the 3 of us boys at the cabin, while Mom returned downstate to give birth to Edward in the hospital in Mount Clemens, where the rest of us had been born. during the day, Dad had work to do, so I was in charge of looking out for Chris and Vince. By the time Edward came along, I was an old hand at changing diapers. We all missed Mom, but Vince especially so, since without Mom there, Dad decided the best way to potty train him was with ice-cold baths, right out of the hand pump. As I remember, Vince learned pretty quick. Dad's army buddy, Alex, 6 foot 4 inches tall, also known as Big Al, helped Dad rush to complete the shower building. Both were big guys, used to laying cement, bricks, and physical labor. I remember seeing them tossing cement blocks to each other, as if they were footballs. Dad was supposed to play football for the Detroit Lions before World War II happened. As one of the world's handiest handymen, Dad built, plumbed, wired the buildings, cleared the land, built the roads, installed utilities, and the campground opened to the public on the 4th of July with 18 sites renting for a rate of $2 a night. Mom registered campers on a plywood board nailed to a giant pine tree in front of our cabin. Somehow, a writer from the Detroit Free Press found the camp and really liked it. He wrote a nice article about this camp with a sandy beach run by a friendly couple. Campers who stayed told their friends. Almost from the start, word of mouth and repeat customers were what made the business work. From the day Mom and Dad opened for business, campers started coming, and they haven't stopped since. Richard and Rose purchased an additional 30 acres, and working side by side, built 100 more sites over the next winter. Then ran the entire larger campground themselves the next summer. Finally, the next fall, Dad began construction on a small 2-bedroom house, which of course included an office. The television show Michigan Outdoors featured the campground and Dad's ingenious handmade playground equipment. And more magazine and newspaper articles and positive word of mouth was happening all the time. For the first 3 or 4 years, the brochures for the campground always featured a teepee. About this time, a new campground opened about a mile from the park named, of all things, Teepee. Mom had to change all of our signs, posters, and brochures. Dad designed and built a sanitation station for trailers that was so innovative and efficient that the state of Michigan adopted it for its state parks. Dad credited Mom's ability to get anything done when he talks about the successful land trade with the state of Michigan that gave the campground its first Bridgeview property. Mom and Dad's reputation as hard workers was legend. Up at dawn and seldom to bed before 2:30, they were constantly on the go during the season. They had to be. Mom registered campers, checked sites, took phone reservations, gave tours, did promotion, distributed literature, fed, clothed, and handled 4 boys. And Dad dumped garbage cans at every site, cleaned up campfires, picked up litter, cleaned bathrooms at noon and midnight, hauled ice and wood, mowed grass. Of course, as soon as the season was over, he was busy building more picnic tables and digging holes for cedar posts and building service buildings or running utilities to new sites. The work never ended. Needing a driver, at the age of 10, Dad taught me to operate the stick shift on his big Dodge truck so that I could drive it to pull the homemade garbage trailer. My job was to drive forward until I heard a whistle. Then I'd stop and he would dump the next garbage can. To this day, when I hear that whistle, I stop in my tracks. Soon, the little boy truck driver became a subject of curiosity and amusement for our campers. Cousins from both sides of my family were initiated into adulthood by summers spent working at the campground. Now adults with families and careers and in some cases businesses of their own, many attribute their success to the example and lessons learned working alongside Mom and Dad. In the early 70s, Mom and Dad negotiated a deal with a real estate developer. He had given up subdividing a neighboring tract north of the campground. The developer was frustrated because after years of marketing, he hadn't sold even 1 lot. The campground was now over 200 acres and had nearly 1 mile of shoreline, viewing Mackinaw City, the Mackinaw Bridge, St. Ignace, Mackinaw Island, Round Island, and Boys Blank Island, as well as the Straits of Mackinaw. As the campground grew, so did my brothers and I, and our responsibilities. We soon learned, under our parents' watchful eyes, to pick up litter, clean toilets, mow grass, rake leaves, pick up garbage, register campers, check sites, and, well, you get the idea. In the 1980s, a local campground adopted a name that was confusingly close to our name, Mackinaw Campground. Mom and Dad went to court to protect the name that they had worked so hard to build. The judge said that since the other campground was in the other county, a county line splits Mackinaw City in half. Our DBA didn't count, and another campground 2 miles away was allowed to have the same name. About this time, a local teacher, acting as an archaeological hobbyist, discovered the remains of a Revolutionary War-era water-powered sawmill just down the road from the campground. Archaeological research resulted in the opening of the beautiful Mill Creek Discovery Park and the rebuilding of the wood-powered sawmill on the original site. Dad knew there would be directional signs everywhere to this new park, and he decided to make lemonade out of lemons by renaming our campground Mackinaw Mill Creek Camping. The name change worked. Our old customers found us, and new ones discovered us. By living frugally, personally handling nearly all of the physical labor of building and operating the campground, and without any kind of advertising or marketing budget, Mom and Dad beat the odds and were able to operate, maintain, and build their business on the strength of word of mouth and repeat customers. Many of the campers coming today were brought to the campground by their parents, who were brought there by their parents. It's a great source of pride in our family that campers have made coming to our park their family's tradition. Mom passed away in 2006, but her spirit is felt everywhere here. Among our campers, you have bragging rights if you can recall encounters with my mother at the camp office. Her outrageous sense of humor and open-mouthed laugh was a joy to everyone. Someone would approach the registration window with a glum look, wife trailing behind. Motioning to the man's wife, Mom would say, "Hey, that's a different one than the one you brought last time." With the timing of a pro, she'd wait a tense moment. Then, to the relief of her victims, throw her head back in laughter. She'd say, "That's right, smile. After all, you're on vacation." Then they would. After Mom passed away, we found volumes of 3-ring binders that she used to catalog every note and letter she had ever gotten from a camper. Over 40 years worth. She had read and saved them all. You could tell they were precious to her. The campground is still run by my family today. Dad asks for a ride through the park almost every day. He looks to see if the grass is trimmed, the litter's picked up, the buildings, playgrounds, and signs are freshly painted, and most importantly, watches to see if the campers are smiling. Then he'll smile and say, "The boys are doing a good job. We hope you'll listen to your friends when they tell you to check out Dick and Rose's place. When you do, we hope you'll remember my mom's advice when she said, 'Smile. After all, heck, you're on vacation.'"